Ask an Expert. I am absolutely thrilled to be joined here by Kaitlin and Dan Clasing, and they're here to talk to us tonight about training and backing young horses, which is a super important topic, a super interesting topic, and I'm excited to dive right in. But before I do so, Kaitlin and Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for
Yeah,
having
thanks
us.
for having us.
Yeah, we are excited to learn from you both. And before I start to pepper you guys with all these questions, do you mind just giving us a bit of background on you guys? Tell us where you are, a bit more about yourselves, and then we'll dive into the topic at hand.
Sure. We are both upper level event riders, and we're based in Lovettsville, Virginia. In our program, we have horses ranging from 2 and 3 year olds getting started all the way up the levels. And we've been running our business together for about 10 years, so
Sorry.
a lot of time together.
That's awesome. 10 years is a long time. Yeah. And I know that you guys, I read from your bios that you've had at least several horses that you've kind of started from the very young ages, brought them all the way up to kind of the upper levels of eventing. And that's incredibly, incredibly impressive. So kind of excited to hear about what your guys' approach is and how you manage to accomplish that over and over again. So can we kind of start by you telling us, how do you approach starting a young horse for the first time, and if there's kind of any key principles that you follow in your process?
Well, I'd say it's changed little by little over the years, and I would also say there's not a right or wrong way to do things. But I think what I'll do is I'll say what I've been doing lately. Most things stay the same from year to year. It's just the little things get changed. But we've just backed 3 horses recently. So what I did with this crop, so say they come into the farm, they're young horses, they haven't been ridden. They're usually a little bit excitable. So first day that they show up, don't do anything. They just go into the stall, get used to that. They get used to their turnout, that sort of thing. And then the next day or the day after that, when they've settled in, I will just put a halter and a lead rope on them, and I will lead them around, like as if I was leading them to the field. I usually just start in the stall, up and down the barn aisle, around the parking lot areas around the barn, and just make sure that they're civil on the ground. They can't be running you over. They can't be excited. They just have to be respectful of your space. If you tell them to stop, they have to stop. If you ask them to walk, they have to walk. And that's just kind of a starting place. From there, we've been tying them to the stall, kind of like you would tie in cross ties, but cross ties can be dangerous for young horses. So in the stall, safer, with some baling twine and halter and lead rope. So they're tied in their stall. And then so that second day, I'm just taking a brush and a curry. I'm brushing either side of them. Some of them, they show up, they just have, they're a little bit twitchy. So just making sure that I can move around them, not have them twitch, or if they do, they just have to get used to me being there. Pick up all 4 feet. Again, like a lot of this comes down to, ask and respond, and they just have to get used to when you ask something that they give you a response, and if they're not giving it to you right away, that getting into that idea of pressure and release, and just holding, like if they don't give you the foot right away, just kind of finding a way to say, hey, no, I need that foot, and they give it to you, that sort of thing. They just got to get used to that. Just get used to you asking a question and then giving you an answer. Um, so yeah, get them not twitchy. When I move around them, I want to be moving in a really obvious sort of way. Like I don't want to be tentative, and I think that's something to stress to people. Especially when you're dealing with horses that haven't been ridden. You don't want to be tentative. You want to be very obvious. You want to be blunt, and you want to take up space. Like, so say I'm in this stage, I've tied them to the stall, and the horse goes to shy or jump towards you. You you want to be safe, but at the same time, try not to jump away from them. Like, they've got to move around you. You can't move around them, sort of thing. Um, from there, I would take the water and feed buckets out of the stall, and I lunge them in the stall. And again, this can be, this is an ask and answer sort of exercise. It's generally a little bit different. They got to coordinate their body, and it's not necessarily easy. They have to figure it out. It's not a physical thing, but they have to figure out how to work their body. And again, they need to give their body to you, and you, again, you need to take up space. Like you can't. I think something that people fall into is if they don't move away from you, move away. And I do this with a stick, so they have to move from the stick. Um, then they start spinning around the horse. Like if the horse doesn't, and this is important because the leg at this point, we're going to eventually replace the whip with leg. But horses, they don't, when you start riding them, they don't understand leg. So the whip is really, really important. And it's not about punishment. It's not about reprimand. But before a horse understands leg, it's moving from your whip, and your whip is the leg. So getting them moving from the whip and the leg, making sure that you don't end up spinning around the horse if they don't want to move right away. So they do that each way. And then the next day it would be saddling and probably bridling. If they're fine with the saddle, they get bridled. The girth, again, they're tied up. I cinch it up very loose, then they get the bridle. Then again, we start the lunging in the stall. So you've got the girth on really loose. You lunge the horse once or twice. Make sure that they're not tight. So a lot of times, if you cinch, they lock their body. They get rigid, kind of like in if you went to ride them in a like that cold back kind of way. So they've got to soften their body. You lunge a circle or two up the girth one hole, lunge this a circle or two up one hole, and then the bridle's on. From there, if they've done the lunging exercise well in the stall, I will go back to walking them in the same way that I did on the second day, around up and down the aisle, around the yard, that sort of thing, staying close to the barn. At this point, I might also jog down the aisle. It's just something I've been doing lately. It's just another test of obedience. If I say, come on, let's trot, will they trot relaxed? Oftentimes do this with the stirrups down. So if the stirrups kind of clang against their side and they get excited, I say, no, you got to stay with me. You got to listen to me. Don't get worried about the stirrups. So that's the real basic groundwork. Occasionally they'll go down to the indoor and lunge a little bit. I'm not big on lunging for the breaking process. I will do it sometimes, but again, it's just the aim is communication. I don't do it for fatigue purposes. And in the breaking process, I never try to use fatigue to get where I'm going. So I might use it if I think it improves the communication. Also, just working in a different area. So if they haven't worked in the indoor, I might just lunge. And again, I keep it very close, kind of like the stall. Like even if they're trotting, it's only 8-10 meter circles, and I don't do a lot of it. It's just for communication purposes. From there, we start. Then it becomes a two-man operation. I'm sure people can break horses on their own. It's going to be really, really inefficient. You really ideally want a two-man operation. And before we were married, and I was breaking horses on my own, I would grab the farrier. I would grab somebody who just wandered through the barn. Wasn't ideal, but like for certain parts of the breaking process, you just need a second person. So at this point, we every day when I start the horse, we're repeating what we did from the get-go. We're tying the horse, tacking the horse. We're doing a couple circles in the stall, and then I will put Kaitlin on the horse, bellying first. So I'll do a leg, and then again repeating the process: walk, lunging in the stall with Kaitlin laying across the horse. We'll do that for a day or two. It really, that sort of thing, it depends on your gauging their reaction. So when they're comfortable with that, then we'll swing over. So I say a day or two. It's usually 2 days. If a horse is particularly sensitive and twitchy at this point, it might be 3, 4, 5, however many days it is. That's kind of the thing. Like the horses, you don't go to the next step until they're comfortable with the step they're at. But usually it's 2 days of bellying. And then Kaitlin will swing a leg over. At this point, it's just the rider is is sort of dead weight. So so you're on a two-person operation, and as long as the person on the horse is comfortable being the person on the horse, you want the more experienced handler on the ground. So if the one person's, you know, a more experienced rider and handler, then that person should be on the ground. If one person's a better handler and the other person's a better rider, then put the better handler. The better handler needs to be on the ground. That's kind of the key thing, though. So then with Kaitlin on the horse, repeating the process. So walk lunging one way, walk lunging the other. Again, the idea the horse has got to be with me, the person on the ground. He's got to be just getting used to the person on their back, but no signals are coming from the rider yet. The horse is listening to the ground person and just getting acclimated to having somebody on their back. So once they're doing that in the stall, we'll do that up and down the aisle. Again, this part could be done over a day, 2 days, 5 days, 6 days, however long it takes for the horse to get comfortable. So then once we're going up and down the barn aisle, the horse has become acclimated to having a rider on the back, but still taking commands from the person on the ground. We will start to combine them. So I will continue to give the aids from the ground. So, you know, just like we did, just from the same as from day 2. You know, if I stop, you need to stop. If I ask you to go, you have to go. Always, you know, more often than not, coming forward from the whip. So as a ground person, you want to keep your presence. When you want the horse to go, you want your presence to be at the shoulder or behind the shoulder. If you're in front of the shoulder, then the horse is behind you, and that's going to translate to being behind the leg of the rider. You know, and I use a dressage whip for this. So if I need to go and the horse is reluctant, the dressage whip, a tap behind the saddle on the butt. But we're starting to coordinate ground information with rider information. So we're walking down the aisle. I'll say to Kaitlin, whoa. And when I say whoa, I stop my forward momentum, and she'll pull in the reins. That's the first thing the horse is going to get from the rider is pulling the reins. While the ground person stops, we're stopping. Then the next command is we're going to go. So I'm going to handle the horse the same as I always have. We're going to move forward from my body language and from the whip. And while that happens, Kaitlin is going to squeeze with her heels, and that's going to be walk. So the horses, when we start giving rider aids, I'll say, you know, the ones that they understand best are weight. They understand weight and they understand the whip. So at the point that you start getting all the rider aids, weight and whip is what they're going to understand best. They're going to understand the leg the next best. They're going to understand the bit in terms of stop, but they're going to understand the bit the least. They're going to understand the leg the second least. The horse doesn't have when you start, it doesn't have a natural understanding of leg. So it's always important to be coordinating the whip behind the saddle with the leg, so that they're getting that idea. And as far as the bit's concerned, the first thing they're going to get is stop. They're really not going to understand steering. Steering is going to be by far the last thing. That's why a lot of people do round pens. We do the barn aisle. That's from racing. People that break horses in racing, they do shed rows, so that you have a wall on either side of you. So you either want to be in a barn with a wall on either side of you, all the stall doors closed, so that when you're starting to give rider signals, they can't go anywhere. They can only stop and go. So yeah, we're at that point, we're coordinating a little bit. Still, you know, you're starting to put the information over to the rider, and it's kind of like a gradual process. So say at this point it's 75% 75% ground handler, 25% rider, and you're just slow. Each day that you coordinate, you're putting the information over to the rider. And once you get to about 50-50, then a lot of times then we'll swap, and I'll start riding, and I'll do one day where Caitlin would be the ground person, I'll be the rider person, and we'll repeat what we've done in case they're worried about having a rider change. But we'll do we call it WOGO, stop when the ground person stops, leg when the ground person goes. Then I would say set loose in the barn. And again, you coordinating the whip, like when you start going, I'd say, and it's not a reprimand, it's an aid, but the horses, they understand whip behind the saddle, and you want to keep your weight behind them, kind of that idea of being in front of the leg. So I'll coordinate my legs with the whip, but really they're understanding the whip better than the leg. So it's a little bit of leg, but that's how you're transferring their understanding of the leg over, is that you're backing it up with the stick. Then again, stop. They understand stop better than steering. If you start steering early, then you're going to get into trouble. You're going to get, the classic situation, if a horse is not being naughty, is that they just get stuck and frozen because they're lacking comprehension. But so they do that. They're comfortable in the barn. They've stopped go. Eventually, doing a little bit of steering, and then I will just gradually increase the radius of where they're comfortable being. So far they've just been with a rider in the barn. I'll start to leave the barn. I'll go 10 feet out the end of the aisle, come back in, 10 feet out the other end of the aisle, come back in. And then I'll just start to slowly spread where they're comfortable out from that. I do it that way. If you get into the situation where horses are nappy, that's kind of a big thing. That horses want to nap back to the barn. If you're always going in and out of the barn, there's not really anywhere for them to nap to. And then eventually, what I've been doing recently is once they're trotting up and down the aisle, I will trot a circle around the barn and then trot through the barn again. So again, not anywhere for the horse to nap to. And then from there, you're kind of starting more normal riding. If they understand the aids, then we have a small indoor. We'll go down. They'll walk, trot, canter in the indoor. And then from there, they'll go to the outdoor. That's a little bit harder because you don't have the walls. And then from there, they might start to hack out a little bit with other horses.
Got it. Okay. That was a lot of information. Thank you so much.
I want to emphasize the breaking process. That there is a process in the riding, but I think getting the horses to understand the aids, I'd say that the big things I'm trying to say is, you want comprehension. I don't want to fatigue the horse. I don't believe in fatiguing the horses into breaking them. That's too hard on their bodies. If you think about legging a horse up, you don't want to be lunging for 20 minutes. Their bodies just aren't ready for that, and they're going to end up sore. So communication, and I don't believe in bucking it out, like that idea. Oh, you're going to buck it out. Sometimes they're going to buck, but that's not. Usually, probably 9 times out of 10, 19 times out of 20. I don't expect to fall off at any point in the process, because it's just one day at a time.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question, is what's the general mood or vibe in your guys' barn? I'm picturing a lot of these things, like the second day, picking out their hooves for the first time. I'm picturing kind of madness. Like the horse is just like being crazy. Or are you guys do you create this really calm, what's your approach to that?
Yeah, it's got to be really calm. And a lot of the breaking process, it translates over into how you want a riding horse to be all the time anyways. They have to be in tune with you. It has to be calm. They have to be relaxed in their body, relaxed in their mind. And that's why it is one day at a time, and it's very progressive. So at no point should it feel like the Wild West in our barn. It always feels very progressive, very calm, and that the horses are given every opportunity to understand boundaries and understand the tools to communicate with them, because they're going to be the same throughout their whole life. Ideally, this is just the starting point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that seems ideal for sure. And how do horses end up in your barn, in your program?
We've been lucky enough to have a few breeders that have sent us repeat people. than word of mouth. And we don't have only babies in the barn. We have some riding horses as well, but we obviously really enjoy working with the babies.
Got it. Okay. And then, Dan, you had said like that they have to be civil on the ground when you're walking them around the property or around down the aisle. What's the right reaction for if they aren't being civil?
What's the right reaction if they're not being civil? Well, you know, say they're acting up. I'd not tried not to get into damage control situations. That's why it's like, start with a radius, of comfort. Um, but so I don't like damage control, but if you have to, whatever it takes. I think if a horse is about to get loose, getting loose is not ideal. Put a chain over its nose. Um, but in those instances, do what you got to do to get them back under control. But once you have some amount of control, get them back into an environment that you're not in damage control anymore. So if I'm leading, and I've had this happen before, where people have sent me horses that they've lived out, they've not been touched, and you go to turn the horse out, and the horse starts dragging you to the paddock. Well, do whatever you need to do to get out of that situation. And I've actually had one client who had horses like that they didn't touch them from the time they were weaned until they were 3, and then they'd send them to break. And I had one start dragging me to the field. I don't exactly remember what I did for damage control, but somehow I got it back into the barn, and then I left it in the stall for 4 days, because the horse was totally unhandled, and I wouldn't leave the stall until I felt like the horse understood me well enough to go back out of the stall. And then it was the same thing. Then up and down the aisle until I felt like I had enough control to get up and down the aisle. Then I turned that horse out. But I had to go 5 days before I could even lead that horse from the barn to the paddock. So damage control, do whatever it is you need to do to get the horse back under control, and then try to understand what that horse's radius is and stay within it.
Yeah, basically it's our job as the trainer to control the variables and put the horse in a situation where they're going to be safe and understand, and we're going to be safe and help them understand. And then once we put them in that situation, to then also be like a fair boss or a fair leader. So you do what you need to do to get control, but then once you have control back, the conversation's over, you move on. You're able to kind of reprimand as needed and correct as needed, but then it's on to the next, and you put them back into a situation where you're not going to lose control again.
Got it. Okay. So is it safe to say that you're like walking this like fine line between them being like totally comfortable and a little bit outside their comfort zone, but you like really try to keep them within their comfort zone and like hinting at outside of their comfort zone in order to like teach them some things, but like for the most part you're wanting them to like feel really confident in what
You
in
want them to be you want them to be confident. You want to stretch that zone of comfort every day. But like to get back to that question of in crisis mode, another thing I would say is the priorities, if you're in that situation, is your safety first, their safety second. Like if in some way that you are going to be hurt really bad, probably letting go of the lead is preferable than getting kicked in the head to getting dragged somewhere unsafe. So you got to take care of your own safety, then you got to take care of their safety, then you can focus on being a humane horseman. But safety's got to come first in those situations.
And as you're stretching the horse's comfort zone, you're also teaching them to look to you to gain confidence, to look to you for leadership. So when you're stretching their comfort zone, it's not just that you're putting them in a new environment. You're putting them in a new environment with the understanding that you are in charge of their safety, that they don't have to. Does that make sense? So
makes perfect sense.
Stretching their comfort zone, but it's also increasing their understanding that they can trust their rider.
Yeah, you're a leader for them.
Yeah.
That makes sense a lot. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you outlined kind of the first 5 days of what you do in those days, all the way into like the first couple of weeks of working with these young horses. at least in the first week or two, how long are these sessions where you're working with them? Like, is it like 10 minutes or like how long are you
Yeah,
kind of putting this pressure on?
yeah, it's about 10 or 15 minutes.
Yep. Short and often. So when they come in to get started, a lot of times they'll be 7 days a week, but it's 7 days a week of short sessions, low pressure, but they just need to repetition to get comfortable.
Remember, they can only digest so much information in a given day. So, you know, longer isn't necessarily better. If you're doing longer and you're repeating the first couple days longer, but remember that each time that you introduce something new, they can only digest so much. So it's not like I could compound these 7, 8 days into one day and work longer. They need 24 hours to digest what information was given to them.
Got it. Okay. So it's even if it's 10 minutes and once a day is kind of the,
Mhm.
got it. Okay.
Once a day, but then also every time we handle the horses, because they're going in, they're coming out, they're moving around the barn and getting fed, having people come in and out of their stall. So every time we handle them, just having that awareness of how they're reacting to
Yeah.
people.
Every interaction's a
Every
positive opportunity to train. So you just mentioned going in and out. What's your guys' turnout approach when they are first arriving?
Generally, we keep them on group turnout. They seem to, young horses especially, enjoy socializing. And generally, we keep them on night turnout, so they're out more than they're in. Um, and that's our typical routine.
Got it. And then you mentioned the importance of kind of the communication with the stick in these early interactions with them because something that a tool they really understand. When you're communicating with the whip, the stick, what does that look like? Is like are we talking like a small tap, like a little? Are you like is it like a pressure with the actual like end of the whip? Like how does that actually look?
It's yeah, it's a tap. It's a nagging tap. Generally, not it's very light, but I would also say it's a little bit like a dimmer switch. So again, the idea of being clear communication. If I'm using this little kind of nagging whip and they say they don't understand it, or let's say that they are a little bit cross about it, and that does happen. I wouldn't say that, the idea is communication, and horses want, their herd animals, they want us to lead, or that they'll become more comfortable if we're leading. But also you have to be you have to make it easy for them to understand. So if this nagging tap, if they're not getting it or they're getting cross, then it has to be increased, like I said, like a dimmer switch. It would have to get a little bit stronger until I get the right response. It's not beating, but if the pestering doesn't work, you got to pester a little bit stronger until you get the right response. And they go, oh, okay, and then you lighten back up. But yeah, like a little bit. It's the tap 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 tap, but it's I use it like a dimmer switch.
And I think
Yeah.
it's important to note too that they're not actually it's not the pressure that they're learning from, it's when the pressure is released that they're learning from. So you put the pressure on in the amount needed, but what they're learning from is when you say, yep, now it's quiet. And that's good.
Interesting. That's an important clarification. So Ashley is wondering if you guys have a checklist or criteria for when a horse is ready to be started, or I guess and how do you decide when a horse is ready for a rider?
Um, Generally, age is a big indicator. We don't want them to be getting too far past 3 years old. Then they're getting bigger, they're getting stronger, and they're also getting to where they think their life is kind of set in stone and they don't think that riding is necessarily a part of their life. And then we have had horses that we start a little bit earlier if they're on the bigger side and we want to be able to go slow with them. And we've also had horses where you just kind of get the sense that like they're ready for a little bit more of a challenge and they need a bit more education. And then you can start them a little bit sooner. So I would say more than any particular indicator, age is a big one because you just don't want them getting too far past that point.
Yeah. And I've heard a bit about like you can sometimes back them really young and then put them out in the pasture for a couple years to like finish growing. Is that something that you guys ascribe to? Is that what's your thought
Almost
on that?
always. Yeah,
Yeah.
we generally do that. Yeah.
Yeah, we just started two that are coming. They're three in 2025. So they're just coming three this year. We put like 45, 60 days on them, and now we won't touch them again until the fall. So they'll have some grow up time.
Yeah.
But it's nice to do it in that way that it's really low pressure. You don't feel like you're in a rush to get anything done. It's just to start that communication and set really good groundwork.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
this part of it, they find physically and mentally fairly easy, I think. But at the point that you start teaching them about contact and going on the bit, that's a little bit harder, and I don't think that they're ready for it at the age we generally break them. So we're, that's going up a grade. I think they need to be a little bit older and a little bit more prepared for harder work. This stuff, I think they find it very easy. And my goal at the end of what I would consider the breaking process is that I can go out to a field, a ring or a field, and I can walk, trot, and canter with a loop in the reins. Um, but the canter would the trot is posting, the canter is in 2 point. You're not asking for any collection, you're not asking for any contact, and the reins are the reins are to steer and to stop. We're not teaching them about dressage connection, and then at the point that they do that, that's usually when they stop and have a break.
Okay. And how do you guys incorporate desensitization into your training process, and what common mistakes should people avoid?
Hmm. How do we incorporate
Well,
desensitization?
yeah, well, it could be anything, but like, so we did have one of the horses in this batch that we've been breaking. He showed up a little bit sensitive and twitchy, and I dealt with that just through the grooming. Because if I groomed him, he was very twitchy. He was very not very comfortable with me. But again, I would emphasize, you know, when you're working around the horse, you yourself can't be tentative. So when I groom him, it's not just the grooming isn't necessarily at this point even to get him clean. I don't really care, but that I can touch all parts of his body. And when I brush him or curry him, I'm doing it with a fair bit of force. Again, hidden knowing that I'm not tentative around him. And if when they get twitchy, you know, you don't want to totally stop what you're doing. You want to give them a little bit of space to understand, but really the goal is that you go on about your business, and the horse doesn't feel like it's threatening you into changing your behavior.
And I think as far as like mistakes that people could make thinking about desensitizing young horses, I don't think there's a lot of value in, throwing a tarp in your horse's stall and letting him get used to a tarp, because at the end of the day, I don't really care if my horse is used to a tarp. I care if my horse has a relationship with me that allows him to walk past the tarp. So I think instead of thinking of desensitizing, thinking about how you're relating to the horse is going to make the horse less reactive because they'll look to you more. So I think sort of taking you don't want to do like shock and awe and throw things at your horse just because you think that's going to create a more confident horse. What's going to create a more confident horse is the steps that you take to create that partnership.
Well, even the little things, like when I was going over the beginning to riding process, like when I just trot them up and down the aisle with the saddle, and usually I'll have the stirrups down, and just having them used to the stirrups kind of gently clanging against their side. It doesn't hurt them. They got to get used to it. But again, it does come down to communication. Like, if I've done this without any tack on them, they know that when I move off, that they trot with me. And it seems, for people that deal with experienced horses, this seems like, oh, what are you talking about? The horse just has to trot with you. But if you've ever trotted a horse that's very little handled and hasn't been ridden, and you say trot, generally they're not going to do anything. You're going to be just pulling on the halter, or they're going to get spooked and they're going to scoot off. You're not. It's not as simple as it sounds for a horse that hasn't done it before. But again, it's just another test of, like, are you listening to me? If I just kind of jog off down the barn like I'm jogging down the 3-day jog strip, will you come with me? Will you come with me, and will you come back? And if they can do that with the irons kind of gently clanging against their side, and they're paying more attention to me than they are to the irons, then I think you've gotten a fairly desensitized horse.
Yeah, you see like the people who are like opening umbrellas in their young horses' faces and like throwing blow up balls at them. And it does make a lot of sense that instead that your approach would instead be how do we create a confident horse by having them being confident in me as like their leader versus some of those other methods. So I think
Well,
that
I'm not impugning any of those methods. Like I said, there's not any right or wrong way to do anything. And if somebody does that well, then that's fine. Another one that I know a lot of people do is they do the long lining. I don't know much about it, but I'm sure for the people that do it and know how to do it well, that can be really helpful. I mean, the idea of it is very strong. Again, you're using ground tools and you're trying to use it in again, in that kind of ground driving, they use the whip as the leg, and they're actually teaching about steering from the ground before they. So I do think if somebody has exposure to somebody that knows about that, I think that could be very useful. It just wasn't the thing that I was taught to do. I do other things. So.
yeah, just not your approach. That it
Yeah, well, it's about exposure, and I was taught by somebody when I was younger. When I was a kid, we all broke horses. I broke the horse when I was a teenager that I went to Kentucky on in my 20s and things like that. But it was just we were just making it up. We were just somehow getting and you can do that. You can make it up. There's no set in stone way to break a horse, but we were kind of making it up. And then when I was in my late teens. I took a job with a guy who'd been breaking horses for 50 years, and he taught me the method that I use to do it. So it is about exposure. If I've been taught by somebody that did ground driving, and but if you don't know anything about ground drive or any of this stuff, if you don't know anything about ground driving or whatever method you're using to break, and you're just like, well, I read this thing, I read a practical horse in an article, and you're gonna just go make it up, just know that you're going to make mistakes along the way, and that there's nothing wrong with that. But it's not going to be super efficient if you're testing it out. And I would say even if you are testing, if you go, oh man, I saw this ground driving thing and it looked amazing. Maybe try it on a horse that's already broke first. Don't try it on a horse that hasn't been ridden or anything like that, because
that's
then
very
both of you are trying to figure it out.
That's very good advice. I agree with that thought. Um, so Catherine is wondering, how do you start training and initially developing the canter? Would love insights to your process, both on the ground and from the saddle.
Well, we don't do any ground cantering. I think you can. I'm not against it. Like if you're doing a little bit of lunging, again, I don't. I would advise against bucking it out. Like if you go, oh, I want the canter, and the horse is racing around on the lunge line. I don't like that. If you're doing the canter on the lunge, it should be that process of the horse is walking and listening to me, the horse is trotting and listening to me, and the horse is then cantering and listening to me. So if you're going to do that, that's how I would approach that. Under saddle, I guess a little bit of a feel thing. You have a feel for the walk, and then you go to trotting. The cantering, when they haven't cantered with somebody on their back before, is the place where you're most likely to run into some crow hopping or bucking or something like that. So I generally do all the things that they tell you not to do if you're learning dressage. You trot and you trot a little bit faster, and the horse is trotting faster. And again, I don't do this in contact. And then eventually I might give a push with my seat when they're already at a pretty quick trot and just pop them right into the canter. I would do it in a light seat unless I felt I needed to be defensive. They're obviously, there is always the chance they're going to crow hop, buck, and you're going to have to take a safety position. But assuming they've been trotting very freely and not defensively, then I like to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to come into canter and they're going to do it freely and not defensively. And again, just maybe down alongside. On the straightaway is going to be easier than on a turn. The turn's going to require more collection. So if they give me 4 or 5 strides on a long side, then I'll trot through the curve. maybe then try again on the next long side, something like that, until they're ready to carry it through a turn.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that Dan said there is to make sure that they're in front of the leg and in self-carriage in trot before you go into canter, because if they're a little behind you in trot, really what bucking and crow hopping is just sort of aggressively dropping behind the leg. So if you already have them in self-carriage on a loose rein, trotting in front of the leg, getting into the canter is going to be much easier. And I do think you should have a realistic expectation. Like he said, go for the long side, understand that they're probably going to trot through the short side. And if you have to touch the reins to turn, they're probably going to drop behind the bridle and drop back to trot. And you don't expect them to canter like an educated riding horse, expect them to canter like a young horse, but still in that self-carriage on light contact.
Okay. And Sarah is wondering about how and when you introduce the show environment. She's looking for suggestions for helping those horses who get overwhelmed by the show environment or warm up ring. It's probably way later.
That would generally be after their break, when they're doing a little bit stronger work. That's really hard, because it's the breaking. It's been day by day. It's progressive. The show environment. I guess the best way to do it. Now, we don't always do this, because it's sometimes we're limited by the number of horses we have and our time constraints. But the best way to do it would be to put the horse on the trailer and to go somewhere that is not a show, a trail ride, a park, a ring, or somebody else's. Say you go to a friend's barn, not your barn, so that they get used to getting on the trailer, going somewhere else. Then once you've done that, maybe you've done that once or twice, they're really calm. Then you go somewhere that's like a really small show, that they have 10 horses there. What we do always do is we always take them to showing venues before we compete them. You don't want to be trying to sort this all out and also go down center line and compete.
It's too much.
You want them to be used to it. So that would be the best way to do it. The second best way to do it, if you're under serious time constraints, and please, I know that some people are going to find this controversial, but if you're going to a show venue, you give the horse a little bit of ace. The horse is going to learn better if it's a little bit. The horse needs to stay in a calm way. Horses can learn on a little bit of ace. What they can't learn is if they're washed out in a panic. If they're washed out in a panic, then they're not going to learn anything. That would be, to me, the second way to do it. Again, I don't believe in fatiguing horses. I don't believe in going to a venue and lunging them for 40 minutes and then riding them. That to me seems unkind, and it's certainly not going to, if they're not, say they're not used to that level of work, if they're not used to a ton of work, and then you go, well, I'm just going to exhaust them. It's not nice to them. It's also not good for their legs. So I would not want to do that.
Yeah, and I think making sure that before you tackle going to a show, you have that game plan that you're going to do little bite-sized, trailer off property, go to a friend's place, go to a show, but not compete. But also to really make sure that at home, you're very comfortable taking the horse's mouth and know that they're going to come back to a stop. And at home, you're very comfortable giving the horse a big kick, and you know that they're going to go forward, because when you go to a show, chances are they're going to see the baby in the stroller getting pushed and spook and scoot off. And you need to know that you can pull that horse up, or they're going to see something that scares them and try to suck behind you. And you need to know that when you give them that big kick, that they're going to not overreact to the kick, but also accept that they know what that means. So basically know that you can communicate through any situation before you get in the situation, because then it's a little too late.
Totally. And okay, so we received a couple of questions from some members on some specific experiences that they're having. So I'm going to jump into those, and then I'll go back to some more general questions. I just want to make sure that I get to these before we run out of time. Okay, so Julie is saying she's having issues saddle training her 4-year-old Lusitano gelding. He's okay with them sitting on him, but becomes unsure and sometimes bucks when asked to move forward. They've done extensive desensitization work and he has excellent ground manners. She said they've literally done everything they can think of to make him want to engage and participate in training and to help him understand having a rider on his back. He's extremely sensitive and intelligent. He's also a grudge holder. If something goes slightly bad, he'll hold it over you for months. Any advice would be greatly appreciated.
Well, I think going back, she says she has a rider on the back, but he's not understanding the leg. So she needs a ground person as well as the rider on the back to sort of help transfer that understanding. If she says he has good ground manners, he's very sensitive, he's reactive on the ground, he's not relating that to the rider on the back. So she needs somebody who can help him understand and transfer the driving aid over from the ground onto the rider. So I would say it sounds like she needs a second set of hands, a knowledgeable person on the ground to help with that.
Another thing I would say about that, and some place that people get, if people give their aids in a way that they're not totally committed, um, it's to kind of relate this to eventing. Like if you see somebody coming down to a jump, and you can kind of see in the rider's body language that they're not really sure they want to get to the other side of the jump, and then the horse ends up stopping. Uh, you know, it's a little bit the same thing. That say a different rider, horse is backing off, but you can tell in that rider's body language that they really do want to get to the other side of the jump. It's a little bit the same way. If you feel unsure about giving the aids, they're not going to be as effective. So again, from a comprehension standpoint, the whip is more important than the leg, but also making sure that all of your aids are coordinating the same. Like your leg doesn't always mean leg. Leg is kind of a euphemism for driving aids. Your driving aids can be your weight, your seat, your whip, your leg. But they all got to be telling the horse the same thing. So if you're I see this all the time. People are kind of squeezing and nagging with their leg, but really their body language says, "Ooh, I really would rather you not go anywhere because I'm a little bit tentative." That's not going to get the reaction you want. All of your aids have to sync up and be sending the horse forward.
And Maria has a similar question, but I just want to see if you guys have a different answer at all. She's asking, how do you deal with a youngster who resists training or has opinions about how hard he should have to work? My 5-year-old Irish sport horse has become very resistant to moving off the leg and is having tantrums. Her trainer believes it's a behavioral issue, not soundness.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd investigate any sort of veterinary or medical issue, but if there's no underlying issue, you still have to put yourself in a position to be the fair boss. So when you put pressure on, the kindest thing you can do for that horse is to see that pressure through to the release point. So if the horse is kicking out at the leg or not, when you put your leg on, you want the horse to give you energy. And until that point that they give you energy, you need to increase that aid until you get the release. And then you say, yep, that's it. And now I'll leave you alone. And then rinse and repeat until the horse understands that there's a boundary there, and that there is a correct response to that aid, so that you put yourself in a position to be the boss and the fair boss, but really kind of like have to like own your power there a little bit.
Yeah, that's a common issue, and not just the breaking, but like at all stages of training with the horse. Especially when some of the types of horses that we ride now are not as forward as say the thoroughbred type horses. I think if your standard way of doing things isn't getting the response that you want, I would go one of two ways. You either need to increase the volume, and sometimes I like play little games in my head. Like if I was riding this horse and I left the start box, what kind of feeling would I want? Or if I was coming around a turn and I saw, let's say you're trotting around, you say, if I saw a forward distance and I wanted to go to it, what kind of response would I need? So I got to play those mental gymnastics when I'm riding. So that would be one thing. The other one is sort of like a little bit of a mental trick for colder horses. Say you've got a horse and you're at a 5 out of 10 on how forward your trot is, or how forward your canter is, and you say, well, but I have a 5 out of 10 in how forward we are. We're somewhere between working and medium, but I'm using a 9 or a 10 with my legs, and I'm just not getting any more. well, then I'd say I'm going to bring my trot back to a 3 so that I can take my driving aids off. So it's a little bit of a, you know, so the horse isn't really taking you anywhere until you take the reins and kind of ask them to come back. If you're always driving on loose, if you're always driving the horse on loose reins, they're always behind you. So sometimes say, I'd really like them to be a little bit more forward, but to kind of play this mental game with them, you say, well, the way I'm going to make them go forward isn't by continuing to kick and kick and kick. It's by softening my leg and taking the reins a little bit so that the horse gets the feeling that they're taking you somewhere.
Okay. Super helpful. And are you guys, the horses that come through your program, are you training them all with the expectation that they will be going to eventing, or are you determining kind of later on what they're suited for? How does that work?
Well, I think eventing is a great starting point because it gives the horses a really well-rounded education. But certainly, we've had horses come through our program that have obvious talents in other directions, and we're happy to point them in that direction. But I think a well-rounded education and a well-broke riding horse applies.
Yeah,
across all
if
disciplines.
they're really lazy horses, let them be show horses. That's kind of been what we've done. If they really don't want to go anywhere, they can go to the show world. They love it.
And how do you guys handle young horses that exhibit resistance, such as rearing, bolting, or bucking in the early stages of training?
Mm, you know, really ideally in the early stages of training, that doesn't come to fruition because you've started them with an understanding and that doesn't present itself. So
But if we're in
if
the
you're already there, then
if we're already there, the important thing, especially with breaking, because I don't think the large majority of them want to be bad, but they are learning something new. This whole thing is new to them. The important thing is not to let them intimidate you into changing your release point. So uh, if a horse is doing bucking, rearing, bolting, uh, it's not. I wouldn't tend to say I want to reprimand them, but the important thing is not to remove the aid that you're already giving. If you remove the aid that you're already giving, then you're sending the horse all sorts of mixed signals. They don't know who's in charge, and you're going to have a hard time getting anywhere. So if they're bucking, I wouldn't necessarily. I might reprimand them, but I might just say I'm going to continue with the aid, or I might tick the aid up a little bit, but sometimes not even. Sometimes it's just maintaining the aid until you get the response you want, and then releasing it. And that is the best way to deal with any of that stuff. So say you ask them to go forward, they rear. You need to get in balance. So you always have to be in balance. If you're out of balance, you're in no position to help with anything. But continue to give that aid until they do what you were asking them to do. Same with the bucking. So I had one of the horses that we were breaking recently do this, where we did go to canter, and again, I try not to be defensive. I try to give him, make the assumption that he's going to be good until not. But they do get panicked sometimes when they do have to let go of their body. There's somebody on their back. It's a change in balance, and they have to let go of their body and trust you. Well, they go to canter and they put their head between their legs and they buck a little bit, but they really just slam to a stop. This is a common thing that they do because it's a little bit of a panic response. They're just not sure what's going on. They stop. I'm not getting up him, but I'm continuing to ask to go forward. What would be bad is if I'm in that situation. I've been trotting. I ask the horse to canter. He puts his head between his legs and freezes, and I just stop, drop the reins, and either get off or walk back to the barn. That's going to take a lot of time to get over. Then it's going to take me a long time to get to what I was trying to accomplish. So what do? I haven't released the aid. I'm giving him. I might give him a second if it's a panic response, but then I'm right back to saying, all right, let's get back to where we were. All right, then the next time he canters and he doesn't do that, okay, now we're done. So consistency and not letting them dictate a release point. When they start dictating a release point, it's really, really hard to continue any kind of training.
Yeah. Are there differences in how you approach training fillies versus colts or geldings?
Not really. No.
No, I don't think so. All horses have different personalities, different temperaments, but no, we don't take that into account.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, yeah, I guess that's a good follow up question. Is just like you said, all horses have a different personality. So you laid out kind of like the framework that you generally like to stick to. What percentage of the horses that you're working with are like falling within that framework, and is it the majority of them that are actually requiring kind of a unique approach or an extended part of one part of the process, or do the majority of them actually kind of fit that timeline?
I don't know if it actually comes out to these numbers, but I always say 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10. The approach that I outlined at the beginning is going to work perfectly well. 9 out of 10, I don't. There's no bucking it out. 9 out of 10, I don't fall off, and then the 10th, you know, you're going to get dropped or whatever. Yeah, that's the reality of life. That's the reality of horses. It's not, nothing is going to be 100%, but 9 out of 10 are just fine. The 10th might drop me a few times along the way.
9 out of 10 is great. That is a great stat. I would have expected way lower than that. So that's awesome. Is there a misconception about starting young horses that you guys would like to debunk?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big one is that it's just for like cowboys or crazy people. You have to be very brave to do it. I think that's very untrue. You have to be a good communicator with horses, but you don't have to be a cowboy. You don't have to be you have to be an experienced horseman, but it's not some, left field thing. It's communication that's going to last throughout that horse's career. So when you see a horse that's 12 and they communicate through pressure and release, it's the same as a horse that's 2 or 3. So
Like I said, when I was a kid, the place I was at, all the kids, they just they broke ponies, they broke horses. And definitely I'd say to people, it's fine to go as long as you're not afraid of them. You can go and you can, you know, figure it out and try different things. But the best way, the most efficient way is to learn from somebody the way that I did in my late teens, learn from somebody who's done it hundreds, maybe thousands of times. Because I'd say in the horse world, probably like 99% of horses are broken by 1% of the riding population. So if you have the opportunity to get exposure from that 1%, that would probably be the best way to do it.
Absolutely. And you guys, this has been so amazingly informative. Like, thank you. I can't believe we're already done with the hour. This is it, like, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. You guys your approach seems so just like it's compassionate towards the horses and really setting them up for a lifetime of success versus just like getting the job done, which I really appreciate. And I know everybody who ends up with the horses that go through your program, I'm sure really appreciate. How can people get in touch with you if people want to work with you or follow you guys? What's the best way for them to kind of to get in touch with you?
yeah, we'd love that. Everything is Clasing Equestrian, so you can email us clasingequestrian@gmail.com. You can find us on social media, Clasing Equestrian, and we do have a website. I don't update it frequently, but it's there, so you can learn a little bit more about us. And we would love to.
Also on YouTube, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago,
Yeah.
we did it's an unedited account of a horse that we broke. It was again one of the 9 out of 10 that was pretty straightforward. And it was 30 days from starting to he was walk trotting, cantering in a field. And it's an unedited account of a horse that we broke a few years ago on YouTube on our channel.
We have that, and that's on our YouTube channel under backing the event horse. And then we also have various vlogs that we've done as we start young horses competition careers. So you can find that as well on our YouTube channel, also Clasing Equestrian.
How cool. That seems like a really, really valuable resource for people. And I'm sure that you're going to get a lot of people checking that out. Kaitlin and Dan, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you taking the time and teaching us about starting young horses today. Based off of how many more questions I have, I'm sure we could make a part 2 out of this, but we really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for
It's been
having
really
us.
fun.
Wonderful. Well, everybody who submitted questions, thank you for doing so, and have a wonderful evening. Bye, guys. Okay, the recording is done. Thank you, guys. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much. That was really fun.
Good. I'm glad.
Sorry it got so dark. I didn't have enough.
Yeah,
The sun went down.